Captain Thomas Whitmore had served Queen Victoria's personal guard for 15 years when he received the assignment that would define his legacy forever. It was March 1882, and tensions across the British Empire were running higher than they had been in decades. Political extremists, Irish separatists, and various revolutionary groups had made increasingly bold threats against the monarchy. Thomas came from a long line of military men who had served the crown with distinction. His father had fought at Waterloo, his grandfather had defended British interests in India, and Thomas himself had earned his commission through valor during the Crimean War, but nothing in his extensive military background had prepared him for the unique challenges of protecting the most powerful monarch in the world. During one of history's most volatile periods, the Queen had received credible intelligence about a coordinated assassination attempt planned for her upcoming visit to Windsor Castle. Unlike the usual vague threats that crossed her desk daily, this information came from multiple reliable sources and included specific details about timing, methods, and the international network of conspirators involved. Thomas was chosen to lead a special protection detail of 12 elite guards, each selected for their exceptional combat skills, unwavering loyalty, and proven ability to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. These men represented the finest soldiers in the British Army, veterans of conflicts across the empire who had volunteered for this most dangerous assignment. The conspirators were led by a brilliant and ruthless man named Count Alessandro Moretti, an Italian revolutionary who had spent years planning what he called the strike that would topple empires. Moretti had assembled a team of skilled assassins from across Europe, each motivated by different political grievances, but united in their determination to eliminate. Queen Victoria. Intelligence reports suggested that Moretti's plan involved infiltrating the castle grounds during a large public ceremony, using the chaos and crowds to mask their approach to the Queen's position. The assassins had spent months studying the castle's layout, the guards' routines, and the security protocols that protected royal events. Thomas knew that conventional security measures would be insufficient. Against such a sophisticated threat, he developed an innovative defense strategy that involved creating multiple layers of protection, with his guards positioned not just around the Queen, but throughout the entire castle complex in carefully coordinated positions. The plan required each guard to be prepared for independent action if communication with the others was severed. Every man understood that he might be called upon to sacrifice his life to protect the Queen, and each had accepted this possibility without hesitation. Their training focused not just on fighting skills, but on tactical thinking and the kind of split-second decision-making that could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. As the date of the Queen's visit approached, Thomas noticed subtle signs that the conspiracy was already in motion. Strangers had been observed near the castle grounds. Unusual activity had been reported in nearby villages, and there were indications that some of Moretti's agents had already begun infiltrating the local population. The night before the Queen's arrival, Thomas gathered his 12 guards in the castle's ancient armory, surrounded by weapons and armor that had protected British monarchs for centuries. The weight of history seemed to press down on them as Thomas addressed his men with words that would be remembered long after that night was over. "Gentlemen," Thomas said, his voice carrying the authority earned through years of combat and command, "tomorrow we may face the greatest test of our lives. We stand between our Queen and those who would destroy not just her, but everything she represents. Some of us may not see another sunrise, but if we hold true to our duty, history will remember that when the crown was threatened, the finest soldiers in the world stood ready to pay any price to defend it." The guards responded with a silence that spoke more powerfully than any oath or declaration could have. Each man understood exactly what was being asked of him, and each was prepared to give everything he had in service to his Queen and country. They spent the remainder of the night in final preparations, checking weapons, reviewing positions, and making peace with the possibility that duty might indeed demand the ultimate sacrifice. Queen Victoria arrived at Windsor Castle on a crisp spring morning, unaware of the deadly drama that was about to unfold around her. She had insisted on maintaining her normal schedule despite the security concerns. believing that showing fear would only encourage more threats against the monarchy. Her courage in the face of danger was matched only by the determination of the men sworn to protect her. Thomas had positioned his guards according to his carefully developed plan. Sergeant William Hayes took the most dangerous assignment, stationed in the castle's bell tower with a clear view of the surrounding grounds, and the main courtyard where the Queen would address the gathered crowd. His military experience as a sniper made him invaluable for spotting threats from a distance. Corporal Michael O'Connor and Private James Sullivan, both veterans of the Afghan campaigns, were assigned to move through the crowd in civilian clothing, watching for suspicious behavior and ready to act if any assassins revealed themselves. Their years of experience in hostile territory had taught them to recognize danger before it became obvious to others. The remaining guards were positioned at strategic points throughout the castle, each responsible for a specific area but ready to respond instantly if the situation demanded rapid deployment to other locations. Thomas himself stayed closest to the Queen, maintaining the appearance of ceremonial duty while remaining alert for any sign of immediate danger. As the morning ceremony began, everything appeared normal to the hundreds of visitors who had gathered to see their Queen. Families with children, local dignitaries, serious tourists filled the courtyard, creating the perfect cover for anyone with malicious intentions. The festive atmosphere made the guards' job more challenging. They had to distinguish between innocent excitement and potential threats. At precisely 11:15, Sergeant Hayes spotted movement in the crowd that didn't match the random patterns of normal spectators. 3 men were moving with subtle coordination, positioning themselves at different points around the Queen's speaking platform. Their movements were too purposeful, too synchronized to be coincidental. Hayes immediately signaled the other guards using the discreet hand signals Thomas had established for silent communication. Within seconds, every member of the protection detail was aware that the expected attack was beginning to unfold. The Queen continued her address, completely unaware that deadly danger was closing in around her. Count Moretti had indeed infiltrated the crowd, disguised as a local merchant and carrying concealed weapons that had been smuggled into the castle grounds over the past several days. His plan was elegantly simple: create a distraction that would draw the guards' attention in one direction, then strike from an unexpected angle while the Queen was momentarily vulnerable. The first phase of Moretti's plan activated when one of his agents created a commotion near the castle's main entrance. Shouting about a fire in a nearby building and pointing frantically toward the village, several guards moved instinctively toward the disturbance, exactly as Moretti had anticipated. But Thomas had prepared for this type of misdirection. Instead of weakening the Queen's immediate protection, he had positioned backup guards who moved forward to fill any gaps created by responses to diversions. Moretti's plan, for all its sophistication, had not accounted for the level of tactical thinking Thomas brought to royal protection. O'Connor, moving through the crowd in his civilian disguise, noticed a man whose attention never wavered from the Queen, despite the dramatic distraction happening nearby. While everyone else had turned to look toward the supposed fire, this individual remained focused solely on the royal platform. O'Connor began moving closer, his hand resting casually on the concealed weapon beneath his jacket. The moment of greatest danger was rapidly approaching as Moretti prepared to implement the deadly climax of his plan. But the Queen's guards had transformed a ceremonial event into a battlefield where courage, training, and absolute dedication would determine whether the most powerful monarch in the world would live or die. The attack began with shocking suddenness when Moretti's second agent threw a small, explosive device toward the royal platform, not intending to harm the Queen directly, but to create chaos and confusion that would mask the real assault. Explosions shattered windows and sent spectators screaming in panic, exactly as the conspirators had planned. In that moment of terror and confusion, Thomas made the decision that would define the rest of his life, instead of moving the Queen away from the platform as standard protocol demanded. He realized that Moretti was counting on predictable responses. Thomas ordered the Queen to remain exactly where she was, while his guards formed a protective circle around her position. The Queen, showing the courage that had made her one of history's most respected monarchs, stood calmly in place, despite the explosion and chaos surrounding her. Her trust in Thomas and his guards was absolute, and her composure in the face of mortal danger inspired her protectors to extraordinary acts of bravery. Sergeant Hayes, from his position in the bell tower, spotted Moretti moving through the panicked crowd with a rifle, approaching from the direction opposite to where most guards had instinctively positioned themselves. Hayes had a clear shot, but taking it would reveal his position to other conspirators who might be watching for exactly this type of response. Without hesitation, Hayes fired, his bullet striking Moretti in the shoulder and spinning him around. Before he could take aim at the Queen, the shot immediately drew return fire from two other assassins, who had been waiting to target any guard who revealed himself. Hayes dove for cover as bullets shattered the stone around his position. On the ground level, Connor had identified the man whose attention remained fixed on the Queen despite the chaos. As this individual reached inside his coat for what was clearly a weapon, O'Connor launched himself forward.
Tackling the assassin.
Just as he raised a pistol toward the royal platform, the two men crashed to the ground in a brutal struggle that drew the attention of terrified spectators who scattered in all directions. O'Connor, though smaller than his opponent, fought with the desperate strength of a man who knew that failure meant not just his own death, but the death of his Queen. Sullivan, still moving through the crowd, spotted a third assassin preparing to throw another explosive device. Without regard for his own safety, Sullivan threw himself directly at the man, catching the lit explosive just as it left the assassin's hand. In a split second of clarity, Sullivan realized he could not throw the device far enough away to protect the innocent spectators around him, making the ultimate sacrifice. Sullivan clutched the explosive to his chest and threw himself away from the crowd, his body absorbing the full force of the blast that would have killed dozens of innocent people. His sacrifice saved countless lives, though it cost him his own, in an act of heroism that would be remembered for generations. Thomas,
Maintaining his position next to the Queen,
fought off two assassins who had managed to reach the platform itself. His sword work was precise and deadly, honed by years of combat experience. But he was outnumbered and fighting in close quarters while trying to shield the Queen from harm. The Queen herself picked up a ceremonial sword from a nearby display and stood back to back with Thomas, ready to fight for her own life rather than depend entirely on others for protection. Her courage in that moment epitomized the spirit that had built the British Empire. Hayes, despite being wounded by return fire, continued shooting from the bell tower, picking off assassins as they revealed themselves in the crowd below. Each shot was carefully aimed to avoid innocent bystanders, demonstrating the remarkable skill and discipline that made him one of the finest marksmen in the British Army. The battle that had erupted in the peaceful courtyard lasted less than 10 minutes, but in that time, ordinary soldiers performed acts of extraordinary courage that would echo through history as examples of what duty and sacrifice truly meant. The turning point in the battle came when reinforcement guards, alerted by the sounds of gunfire and explosions, arrived at the courtyard with military precision. But by then, the core of Thomas's original 12-man team had already broken the back of Moretti's conspiracy through their individual acts of courage and sacrifice. O'Connor, still grappling with the assassin he had tackled, managed to overpower his opponent and secure the man's weapon. Bloodied but determined, O'Connor immediately turned his attention to protecting civilian spectators who were trapped in the crossfire, using his own body as a shield while helping families escape to safety. From his elevated position, Hayes continued to provide covering fire despite his wounds, ensuring that no assassin could approach the Queen's position without facing accurate rifle fire. His marksmanship had already eliminated 3 of Moretti's agents, and his continued presence in the bell tower prevented any coordinated assault on the royal platform. Thomas, fighting beside his Queen, had sustained multiple wounds but refused to yield ground. His sword work was becoming more desperate as fatigue and blood loss began to affect his strength, but his determination never wavered. Each parry and thrust was guided by 15 years of unwavering loyalty to the crown. The Queen herself had proven to be far more formidable than Moretti had anticipated. Her years of receiving military briefings and her natural courage, combined to make her an effective partner in her own defense. When one assassin managed to get past Thomas's guard, the Queen's well-placed strike with her ceremonial sword saved both their lives. Moretti, wounded, and watching his carefully planned conspiracy collapse around him, made one final desperate attempt to complete his mission. Drawing a concealed pistol with his uninjured arm, he took careful aim at the Queen from across the courtyard, knowing this would be his only remaining chance. But Private David Cameron, one of the younger guards who had been positioned near the castle's main entrance, spotted Moretti's final gambit. Without hesitation, Cameron sprinted across the open courtyard, directly into the line of fire, reaching Moretti just as the Count pulled the trigger. Cameron's tackle sent Moretti's shot wide, but the young soldier paid the ultimate price for his bravery. The Count's second shot, fired at point-blank range, killed Cameron instantly. However, his sacrifice had saved the Queen's life and ended Moretti's ability to continue the attack. The remaining assassins, seeing their leader dead in their plan, in ruins, attempted to escape through the panicked crowd. But the arriving reinforcement guards had surrounded the entire area, and the surviving conspirators were captured within minutes of their failed assault. As the immediate danger passed, the full cost of the victory became apparent. Private Sullivan had died absorbing the explosive blast that would have killed innocent spectators. Private Cameron had given his life stopping Moretti's final shot. 3 other guards had sustained serious wounds, and Hayes remained trapped in the bell tower, bleeding heavily from multiple gunshot injuries. Thomas, swaying from blood loss, but still standing protectively beside the Queen, surveyed the courtyard that had been transformed from a peaceful ceremony into a battlefield littered with the bodies of enemies and heroes alike. The Queen was safe, but the price paid by her guards would be remembered forever. Queen Victoria, her ceremonial dress torn and blood-stained, looked around at the men who had risked everything to protect her. For the first time in decades, the monarch who had commanded the loyalty of millions found herself struggling for words to express her gratitude for such extraordinary sacrifice. The conspiracy had been defeated, but the stories of courage displayed that day would inspire future generations of guards and remind the world that some duties are worth any sacrifice, including life itself. In the aftermath of the attack, Queen Victoria personally tended to her wounded guards while waiting for medical assistance to arrive. Her hands, accustomed to signing royal decrees and holding ceremonial objects, now pressed bandages against bullet wounds and held the hands of dying soldiers who had given everything in her service. Hayes, finally rescued from the bell tower, had lost considerable blood but survived his wounds. As he was carried past the Queen on a stretcher, he managed to whisper, "Your Majesty, it was an honor to serve." The Queen knelt beside him, taking his hand, and replied, "The honor was entirely mine, Sergeant. England will never forget what you did here today." Thomas, despite his own injuries, insisted on personally overseeing the investigation of the attack and the interrogation of the captured conspirators. The intelligence gathered revealed the true scope of Moretti's network, leading to the arrest of dozens of co-conspirators across Europe and preventing future attacks on British interests. The news of the assassination attempt and the heroic defense spread across the British Empire within days. Newspapers in London, Delhi, Sydney, and Toronto carried detailed accounts of how a small group of royal guards had faced overwhelming odds and saved their Queen through individual acts of extraordinary courage. Private Sullivan and Private Cameron were posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor the British Empire could bestow. Their families received personal visits from the Queen herself, who told them that their sons had died as heroes defending not just her life, but the principles and freedoms that the British Empire represented to the world. The surviving guards, including the wounded Hayes and O'Connor, were promoted and honored in a ceremony that drew dignitaries from across the empire. But for these men, the greatest reward was simply knowing that their Queen was alive, and that they had proven worthy of the trust placed in them. Thomas was elevated to the rank of colonel and given command of the entire Royal Guard. His innovative tactics and leadership during the crisis became standard training for future generations of royal protectors. Military academies across the empire studied the Windsor Castle defense as an example of how proper preparation, tactical thinking, and individual courage could overcome even the most sophisticated threats. The Queen herself was profoundly changed by the experience. She had always understood intellectually that men served the crown at great personal risk, but witnessing their sacrifice firsthand gave her a deeper appreciation for the human cost of royal duty. She made it her personal mission to ensure that the families of all royal guards received proper support and that their service was recognized and honored. More importantly, the failed assassination attempt demonstrated to the world that the British monarchy was protected by more than just ceremony and tradition. The guards who had fought that day represented a commitment to duty that transcended personal safety, political convenience, or social status. European revolutionaries, who had hoped that Moretti's success would inspire similar attacks across the continent, instead found themselves facing the reality that the British crown was defended by men willing to die rather than fail in their duty. The psychological impact of the failed conspiracy was as important as the physical defeat of the assassins. Years later, when historians studied the incident, they noted that the Windsor Castle defense represented more than just successful royal protection. It embodied the spirit that had built the British Empire and demonstrated why that empire commanded respect and loyalty from millions of people around the world. The guards who fought that day had proven that, when duty demanded the ultimate sacrifice, there were still men willing to pay that price without hesitation or complaint. Their courage became a standard against which future generations would measure themselves. 20 years after the Windsor Castle attack, an aging Thomas Whitmore stood before a new generation of Royal Guard recruits, sharing the lessons learned from that terrible day when duty demanded the ultimate sacrifice. His hair had turned white, and scars from old wounds marked his weathered face. But his eyes still held the intensity that had made him one of history's most respected military leaders. "Gentlemen," Thomas told the young soldiers, "you are about to take an oath that may cost you everything. Some of you may wonder if any person, even a monarch, is worth dying for. Let me tell you what I learned on the day when that question was no longer theoretical but immediate and deadly." He gestured toward a memorial wall that bore the names of Sullivan, Cameron, and dozens of other guards who had given their lives in royal service over the centuries. These men didn't die for one person. They died for the idea that some things are more important than individual survival. They died for the principle that civilization depends on people being willing to stand between order and chaos, regardless of the personal cost. The recruits listened with rapt attention as Thomas described the split-second decisions that had saved Queen Victoria's life and preserved the stability of the British Empire during one of its most vulnerable moments. He spoke of Hayes's marksmanship from the bell tower, O'Connor's desperate struggle in the crowd, and most importantly, of Sullivan and Cameron's final sacrifices. Private Sullivan had perhaps 3 seconds to decide whether to save himself or save the innocent people around him. Thomas continued, "Private Cameron had even less time to choose between his own life and his Queen's. Neither hesitated. Neither calculated odds or considered alternatives. They simply did what their training and their honor demanded." The story had become legendary within military circles, but Thomas always emphasized the human rather than the heroic elements. These had been ordinary men facing extraordinary circumstances, and their courage came not from superhuman abilities, but from dedication to principles larger than themselves. Queen Victoria, now in her final years, had never forgotten the lesson taught by her guards that day. She had transformed royal security protocols throughout the empire, ensuring that future guards received the training and support necessary to face similar threats. More importantly, she had established funds to support the families of guards killed or wounded in royal service. Hayes, despite his injuries, had served another 15 years before retiring with full honors. He spent his retirement years training new guards, passing on the tactical knowledge and mental toughness that had made him so effective during the assassination attempt. His memoirs became required reading at military academies throughout the British Empire. O'Connor had received a field promotion and eventually commanded his own regiment. carrying the lessons of Windsor Castle into other theaters of conflict where British interests were threatened. His reputation for courage under fire made him a legend among common soldiers who knew that he had proven himself in the ultimate test. The families of Sullivan and Cameron had been elevated to positions of honor within British society. Their sons' sacrifice ensuring that they would never want for anything. But more importantly, their stories became part of the national narrative about duty, courage, and the price of freedom. European intelligence services continued to monitor the aftermath of Moretti's failed conspiracy for decades, noting how thoroughly it had been defeated and how effectively the British had learned from the experience. No similar attempt was ever made against Queen Victoria, partly because potential assassins understood that they would face guards trained and motivated by the memory of Windsor Castle, as Thomas concluded his address to the new recruits. He offered them the same choice that he and his men had faced 20 years earlier. You can serve with distinction by following orders and maintaining discipline. But if the moment comes when duty demands more than routine service, when the choice is between your life and your mission, you must decide now what kind of man you want to be remembered as. The young guards took their oath that day, knowing exactly what it might cost them, but also knowing that they stood in the tradition of men who had proven that some sacrifices are worth making. The legacy of Windsor Castle lived on in their commitment to serve something greater than themselves, regardless of the personal cost. History would remember Thomas Whitmore and his guards, not just for their tactical success, but for demonstrating that courage, honor, and duty were more than just words in military manuals. When duty truly meant death, they had chosen duty without hesitation, and their choice had shaped the future of an empire.